What is a sourdough starter? Well, I'll tell you. The key to scoring is confidence. You just want to pick a shape and go for it. So although this process might seem like a literal part-time job, I promise you, it's not. Ba-bam! Calm brown! There actually is a purpose to the score. It's not just to make her look so cute. So I'm just gonna go in with 2 hands, grab one side of the dough, stretch it up, and fold it over. Get it centered, and then just flip it over. And just like that, 6.5-ish hours later, we've got an active starter at its peak. Push the dough away, pull it close, away, and close. I'm now gonna mark the level. So that's my 3-day process. For the shaping, I do this part. She's so cute. I love her. Glamour shot 1, 2, 3. Glamour shot 4. Is this too much? I don't care. Welcome to part 2 of the normal girls sourdough routine. If you came from part 1, you'll know that I've literally just picked up where we left off. If you haven't seen part 1 is all about the sourdough starter. I go through the whole process of like, what is a sourdough starter? What's the purpose? Why do we feed it? How do we feed it? When do we feed it? I go through that whole spiel in part 1 and show you step by step how I get the starter from cold and inactive and in the fridge yesterday to now looking like this. I'm calling this a normal girl's approach to sourdough because I'm not an expert. I'm a girl living a normal life with a normal amount of free time, and I don't want bread making to take over my life. However, although I am a normal girl, I do fantasize about myself as if I'm a woman on an English countryside, walking along a river, picking fresh herbs. Like in my head, that's who I am at my core. But who I am in actuality is a normal girl living a relatively average American modern life. So I've added in sourdough bread making to that life to help me fantasize about the life that I wish I could live, but also just to slow down this life and infuse a little wholesomeness into this very modern life that I'm living. I explained this all in part 1, but just for a quick little recap, my sourdough bread process extends over 3 days. In the evening, right before I go to bed, on day 1, I take my starter that's been in the fridge all week. I take it out of the fridge. I don't feed it. I don't do anything to it. I just put it on the countertop, flip over the lid so it can get some air going, and I let it come to room temperature overnight. Then on day 2, which I'm in right now, I feed my starter in the morning with equal parts bread flour and warm filtered water, and then I let the starter rise and become active throughout the day. So that's the point that we're at right now. I'm in day 2. I fed my starter this morning, and now it has more than doubled in size. It is active and it is ready to be made into a sourdough bread dough. So I'm just gonna get right into it. What we have in here right now, I've poured 455 grams of bread flour in here, as well as 10 grams of very fine salt. There's only 2 ingredients, and these are the only dry ingredients. So I'm gonna put this aside for now. Then in this other bowl, I'm gonna put 100 grams of this active sourdough starter. I'm gonna put 100 grams of this in here. And then I'm also gonna put 345 grams of slightly warm filtered water right in with the starter. I put the starter in first because it can be kind of hard to get exactly 100 grams of this. So putting this in a bowl completely by itself, it allows me to be able to remove some if I need. So yeah, that pour was 122 grams, so I gotta just remove a little bit. I'm just gonna take a spoon and scoop some on out. Again, I said this in part 1, but I'm gonna wipe my spoon off completely, especially now because this starter is active now, it's very sticky now, and you really, especially when it's at this state, you don't wanna be putting any of this down the sink. So I kind of just wiped the spoon clean. Now I'll go clean it in the sink, but I don't want any of that starter that was on this spoon to then wash down the sink. So kind of just clean it off first and then wash it. Next, I'm gonna pour 345 grams of slightly warm filtered water. You don't wanna be using sink water because the chlorine in sink water can actually kill all the active stuff going on in your starter. So you wanna make sure it's filtered water, and I just microwaved this for about like 30 seconds just to get it a little warm, not too warm. You don't want it to be like hot, but just like a little above room temperature. Now I'm actually gonna kind of whisk together the water and the starter and kind of like dissolve the starter in the water a little bit. I just think it makes it easier to like fully incorporate everything together because the starter is so sticky, and so putting starter just like straight into flour, it kind of can create clumps. I know a lot of people don't do this step, But I just find this makes the whole combining all the ingredients, it makes it so much easier. Now I'm gonna pour my wet ingredients, which is just water and starter, into my dry ingredients, which is just the bread flour and the salt. I'm gonna pour this in, and you may have noticed I now have a glove on. This is because although I do in my head view myself as this, you know, slow life lady living off the land, although in my head that is my life, that is in fact not my life, and I am in fact like a modern average gal, and I do have a Russian manicure. And over the next 4 hours, it's about 4:30, over the next 4 hours, I'm gonna be touching this dough every hour.
Oh my God.
Stop. You guys don't understand how hard it is to film videos while Miles is in the background.
Why?
Okay, but what was I saying? I do have a Russian manicure. My nails are long. And I just don't wanna be picking flour and dough out from underneath my nails every hour, on the hour, for the next 4 hours. I don't want to be doing that. Although I wish I was a woman in a countryside who doesn't even know what plastic is. Although I wish that was my life. Like, I am gonna incorporate some modern stuff, such as rubber gloves, in order to make this process more enjoyable and more fun. Because if any part of this process starts not becoming fun, then what's the point? We're doing this to have fun. So glove is on, it's time to mix this dough. I'm just gonna pour all of this straight in, make sure we get all of the starter, and then I'm just gonna go on in and start mixing. Now, you don't wanna be like kneading the dough. This isn't like a knead the dough recipe, but you do wanna like fully incorporate all the ingredients. So you wanna keep mixing until all the ingredients are combined, but we're not gonna be like kneading for 5 minutes longer after it's all combined, you know? So think about this as like a thorough mix, not as like a kneading session. Now you may notice as I am mixing this, I'm kind of like rubbing around the edges of the bowl because I wanna make sure there's no like dry bits that end up, like any extra flour that ends up on the side of this bowl, because I want all the flour to be incorporated in. So I'm kind of like mixing around, mixing under. I'm also kind of like scraping the sides just to kind of like clean the sides as I'm mixing this, because one part about sourdough bread making that is annoying is the cleanup process. So I have done a few things as I've been making dough. I've incorporated a few things throughout the making process that make the cleaning process a little bit easier. So right now I'm just scraping any bits of dough off of my glove to get it into the bowl. Make sure we don't steal any of this goodness. Okay, we've got most of that off. I'm literally just gonna take this off and throw this away. The gloves that I used for the next 4 hours, I reuse over the next 4 hours, but that first glove, you just get rid of it. So now, as you can see, the dough is completely mixed, but we've got a lot of extra remnants around the sides of the bowl. Now, if we leave that, it's fine. Like, it's fine to leave that, but it's gonna make the cleanup process really annoying, like really annoying. So what I do while the dough is still wet and right after I mix it, I just scrape all of the stuff off the sides of the bowl and just get it off now. Like, I'd rather put in this effort now to clean the bowl now to make my cleaning process later easier. I'm now gonna cover our mostly clean bowl with our mixed dough. I'm gonna cover it with a little towel, and then you want to put this in a slightly warm area. I live in Chicago, it's the winter, so a slightly warm area for me that I can make in my apartment is the oven, not when it's on, but the oven with just the oven light on. The oven light makes it a little warm in there, so it just makes it like the perfect little mini sauna. But be careful with this, because some ovens, especially older ovens, the light can be way too hot and it can be like too much for your dough. So just like make a judgment call with that one. Slightly warm, not like boiling hot. But okay, so I've covered the dough. It's in the oven with the light on. It's gonna sit there for 1 hour, so it's gonna sit there until 5:30. And while it's doing that, I need to tend to Arthur. We always need to tend to Arthur. If you missed part 1, my starter's name is Arthur. We can never forget about him. He is what allows this whole thing to happen. So now that I've used the portion of Arthur that I need for the dough, I'm just gonna scrape down the sides of this jar, clean it up. I really don't like when the jar starts like getting stuff all along the sides. I probably switch to a clean jar probably every 2 weeks, honestly. So I've scraped down the sides, and this is now the starter that we have left. And in order to keep baking with this every single week, this is all we gotta do. I'm literally gonna take this jar, put the rubber band back on. It's not serving a purpose right now, but it's just so that I don't like lose it. I'm gonna put the lid on top, but I'm not gonna seal it, just like it was when I took it out at the start of this whole process. I'm just gonna rest the lid on top. We don't wanna seal it because this is a living, breathing thing. It does need a little bit of air, so we don't wanna completely seal it while it's sitting in the fridge all week. I actually was completely sealing my starter the first few weeks, I think, because I hadn't realized that you're not supposed to. And honestly, it was still fine. It was still okay. It was still working as it needed to, but I think I'm just like taking better care of it now by just like resting a lid on top instead of like sealing a lid. So now I just take this, pop it back in the fridge. That's it. Now I had kind of a lot left over. I don't like to feed that much starter just to make one loaf. Like that's a little too much starter to start with. But I'm not gonna bother discarding anything right now. I'm just gonna let that whole thing sit in the fridge. And then next week when I go to use the starter again, I will pour some out of the jar before I feed it. Just because sourdough starter, if you remember what I started with, at the beginning of part 1, I started with like that much starter. And then I ended up with about this much starter. So it really does grow a lot. So the purpose of discarding some before you feed it is simply to just like manage the volume. If you need a lot of starter for whatever you're doing, if you're making a ton of loaves, if you need that much starter, you don't need to discard before you feed. There's no like scientific process that requires discarding. It's just simply to like help you manage what you're keeping. Over the past few weeks, I've gotten pretty good at feeding my starter to the point where I really don't even need to discard that much. This week I fed it a little more than normal just to like show you guys more of a visual process. I wanted to show you guys it growing way more, but usually I feed it a little less. I end up with a little less. And then after I use what I need for my dough, it leaves me with like pretty much the amount of starter I would need to just like feed again for the next week. And you'll get used to that process just as you continue it. You'll get used to like how much starter you need to start with, how much you want to discard down to, how much you need to feed it for the recipe. But that's just something that you'll like refine as you go. So it's an hour later. I'm gonna take this out of the oven. And from the moment that we mix our dough, the bulk fermentation process begins. That basically just means that all the like little active goodies that are in the starter are gonna start to mix in and be active goodies in this dough, and they're gonna make the dough start to taste good. They're gonna start messing with the texture. They're also gonna rise the dough. So bulk fermentation is really just when like the dough becomes alive. That's the extent to which I understand it. And that's honestly, I think, the extent to which you need to understand it. We don't gotta be going into all the science. So right now we are an hour into the bulk fermentation process, and this is what the dough looks like. And now we're gonna do our first stretch and fold. Basically what a stretch and fold is you stretch and fold the dough. It's pretty simple. And basically the purpose of that is to just like get the texture to the point you want the texture. It strengthens the gluten network, I think. I think that's what causes the texture to be all good in sourdough. But basically stretching and folding the dough during bulk fermentation, it makes the dough a little elastic, and that's good because that's what's gonna allow us to be able to create like tension in our little loaf when we're shaping it. We want it to be like stretchy a little bit and like hold its shape. So doing these stretch and folds is what allows that. So I just got my gloves a little wet so the dough doesn't stick to them. And what I do is I'm just gonna go in with 2 hands, grab one side of the dough, stretch it up, and fold it over. Then I'm gonna turn, grab from the side, stretch it up, and fold it over. I'm gonna get the gloves a little wet, and then we're gonna turn, grab a side, stretch it up, and fold it over. The more times we do this, the more times the dough is gonna like resist being pulled. It probably won't show on camera, but you can definitely feel it when you do it. Like it's starting to like fight back a little bit. And so I just do this probably 4 or 5 times, maybe 6 times, until this moment right now when it really does not want to be stretched. So that'll be the last time that I do it. So now I'm gonna cover the bowl back up, put it back in the oven with the light on, and then I'm gonna come back in an hour. So for 4 hours on the hour after you mix, you're gonna do a stretch and fold. So 4 stretch and folds, 4 hours. This is the first hour and the first stretch and fold. I don't think I'm gonna show you all 4 rounds because it's literally just that process, again, every hour on the hour. But what I do wanna call out is these stretch and folds take less than a minute. So although like when you're looking at a sourdough recipe or when you're watching a YouTube video, you'll see them say, okay, for the next 4 hours on the hour, you got to do this. And it's gonna seem like very labor intensive. Like I told you, I'm a normal girl. And then I also told you that I'm gonna be doing something for the next 4 hours. And you were probably like, dude, but what I'm doing every hour is so incredibly simple and so incredibly quick. So in between all these stretch and folds for a full hour, I'm just chilling. Miles and I are watching Euphoria. I'm having a very chill Sunday afternoon / evening. We're about to start cooking dinner. Like the bulk fermentation and the stretch and folds, this is something that's like going on in the background of life. And so while it seems like it's gonna like consume your whole day, it's really not. Even mixing the dough, I find that to be more like labor intensive than the stretch and folds. And even that takes like 3 minutes. So please don't be intimidated by this process. It takes a lot of time, but most of the time is downtime. And the times that you do have to jump in to do something, it's fairly simple. So yeah, I'm gonna come back to you when I'm doing my final stretch and fold, and I'll show you the final stretch and fold, and I'll show you how we shape the loaf. I just did my last stretch and fold. The dough is super, super smooth. It's got some elasticity to it, like we're doing good. And now the next step is my favorite step. I also do love the stretch and folds because they are very soothing, but my favorite step by far is the shaping. When I'm shaping a loaf of dough, I feel like that girl that I've been describing. It's so like meditative for me. When I'm shaping the dough is also when I name my loaf. I name all of my loaves. So when I'm shaping them, I figure out, you know, the vibe, their personality. And this is where I really, really just like enjoy the process and have fun with it. For the shaping, I do this part. Do. I do this part without gloves because I want to feel the dough, you know, like I want to be one with the dough. So no gloves for this part. So I get my hands wet and I do pat just like a little bit of wetness on the counter. And I just flip the bowl over and let the dough just fall out on its own. So now when I first was shaping a few of my first loaves, I thought that flour would be what helps me shape it. But then I realized that actually you want the dough to be like somewhat wet, because when you're shaping the dough, you're kind of like stretching it and you're kind of, you'll see when I get to this part, but the outer layer of the dough, you kind of like increase tension in it and you want it to be like stretchy. But when you put flour on your surface or on your hands, and when you're trying to create that tension, when you have a lot of flour on the outside surface, the flour, obviously, I didn't think about this at the time, but obviously the flour is actually gonna dry that outer surface, which is gonna cause it to crack. So actually, you want your surface to be slightly tacky wet, like really the surface doesn't matter too much, but especially you want your hands to be wet, and you don't need to use any extra flour in this process. So first what I do is you're gonna do an envelope fold where you take one side of the dough, the top, flip it down. You take the, what is this, the left, one side and flip it over, the other side and flip it over, like so, and then you take the bottom and flip it up, like that. Then I kind of roll the dough over, and now all of those seams are on the bottom of the dough. And what I do is I kind of push the dough away from me and pull it close. Push the dough away from me and pull it close. If it starts sticking to my hands, I just get my hands a little more wet. So push the dough away, pull it close, push the dough away, pull it close, away and close, away and close. And I just kind of do it until it forms a somewhat cute little circle. This is what we call, I think this is called the pre-shape. And so for this one, it doesn't need to be perfect. You just kind of get it in the general shape. You do just like a pretty loose shape. And then what we're gonna do is we are going to cover our little loaf with a towel, and we're gonna let, she's giving her, so I'm gonna assign her with the she pronouns. We're gonna let her rest on the countertop underneath the towel for 20 minutes. After 20 minutes, we come back and we shape again, and that is the final shaping where we make it a little tighter. It's been 20 minutes. The loaf has obviously flattened, but that's okay, because now we are going to do our final shape. Tapping a little bit of water on this side, scoop it up, flip it over, And then I'm gonna do the same thing that we just did. 4 folds. And then the same thing, pushing away, pulling forward, pushing away, pulling forward. You'll notice that there is a lot more tension in the dough now, even just from it resting on the counter for those 20 minutes. Like, it's now holding the shape a lot better. I'm actually gonna dry the surface a little bit so that we can use the kind of tension of it dragging across the surface. There's our little loaf. She's so cute. I'm gonna name her Judith. While Judith was resting on the countertop, I prepped a banneton basket. I just put the liner in, and then I dusted some rice flour in here because the rice flour helps create a little bit of a crunchy crust on our loaf. You can also just use bread flour, but I like the crust that occurs after using rice flour. You also don't need a banneton basket. I like it, makes me feel fancy, makes me feel cute. It is what is good for the dough because it allows it to still like breathe and everything, but you can just use a bowl lined with a towel and then just shake the rice flour over that towel. So now I'm gonna take this again, lift up Judith, flip her upside down, and put her in the basket. Now the bottom of the loaf is gonna start to stretch apart like this, and that's okay. We're gonna let the loaf rest in this basket for about 10 minutes, and then we're gonna do what we call a stitch, which is where we close up this little situation that's going on. Okay, I used that 10 minutes to clean up the kitchen, and now we're gonna do our final little stitch. So what we do is we grab some dough on one side and grab some dough on the other side, and we just kind of pull it together and stick it to the other sides. And just kind of go around and pull it together, stick it to the other sides, pull it together, stick it to the other sides. This is gonna help the gases that produce overnight. It's gonna help the gases stay in our loaf instead of just escaping. It's also gonna increase the surface tension on the other side. It's just gonna tighten it up a little bit. Now we're gonna take that same towel, cover up Miss Judith, and we are gonna put her in the fridge overnight, and thus concludes day 3. Good morning. So Judith has been in the fridge cold fermenting all night. Look at her, she's doing great. Day 3 is also a very chill day. It's not as chill as day 1, but it's very, very, very simple because Judith has been in the fridge cold fermenting overnight, and literally the only thing we have left to do with her today is to score her and bake her. I have my Dutch oven preheating in the oven at 500 degrees. You want to heat up the oven while the Dutch oven's in it so that it doesn't like drastically drop temperature once you put the Dutch oven in. And you also want to like preheat the inside of the Dutch oven too. So you put the Dutch oven in with the lid on, but now it is time to score. So I've just cut a little piece of parchment paper. You don't want it to be too big because I've done it before where I just rip a huge sheet of parchment paper and just like leave it so that there's extra that like folds around the dough. And that's fine, but I actually noticed that when it has room to fold around the dough, it was actually misshaping my dough in the Dutch oven and like creating like it looked like it was like wrapped in a package, you know what I mean? So just cut a little piece like this that's just big enough to cover the bottom of the loaf. Then I put this on top and get it centered and then just flip it over. Judith, you are looking great. I kind of just spread around the rice flour. The key to scoring is confidence. You just want to pick a shape and go for it. So I think I'm gonna do like a cross. And what you want to do is you want to hold your knife at like a 45-degree angle. And once you pick a lane, just go for it. So I'm going for a 45-degree angle across the bread. I also go in again and just kind of go like under the lip. You know what I mean? This is gonna help it create an ear. And again, pick a lane and just go for it. Gonna go in one more time underneath the little, what's it called? You know, it's a little off center, but that's okay. Judith's just got some personality. Now I'm just gonna add some little scores in these triangles just to give her a little extra cuteness. Now I've noticed when I cut in this formation, in a cross formation, sometimes the like points of the triangles get stuck. So what I'm actually gonna do is just cut with a scissor underneath the points, and that's gonna help them like stay unstuck, you know what I mean? And it's gonna help them rise up. It's gonna help us get a little bit of an ear. But you don't want her to sit for too long after you score her. So you kind of gotta move a little quickly. So I just took my Dutch oven out of the oven. I'm gonna pick her up by the edges with a parchment paper and drop her in, cover her up. And I had the Dutch oven with the empty oven preheating at 500, but the second that you put it in the oven with the loaf, again, we're gonna bring it down to 450. After 20 minutes are done, I'm gonna go in the oven, take off the lid, and then I'm gonna cook her for 20 more minutes. In 40 minutes, I'm finally gonna have my very own loaf of sourdough bread. This is what she's looking like 20 minutes in. She cracked a little bit, which is annoying. But she's looking cute and smelling great. It is the moment of truth. Let's take a look. Judith! Judith, you pulled through. So she does have this one crack here, but look how good she did. Glamour shot 1. Ooh, ah. Glamour shot 2, yeah baby. 3, I don't know. Do we need a third? Glamour shot 4. Is this too much? I don't care. She's so cute. I love her. So she rose very nicely, very evenly. She's got a good crust on the outside. Perfect level of browning, if you ask me. And this is just so fun. Like, I made this over the course of 3 days. The bread is totally cool, so I am now inserting this clip from the future to show you what she looks like inside. I gotta give you what you came for. Judy, you have outdone yourself. Got some butter. Oh, baby.
Oh, that's for me, right?
Sure. But first, it's for me. So I actually did Google the crack situation just because I want to continue to learn. And I learned that the crack means that I didn't score my bread deep enough. There actually is a purpose to the score. It's not just to make her look so cute. The purpose of the score is actually to give the loaf a break point. As the loaf rises, it will break. And so the score, first of all, makes it easier for the loaf to rise because it already has a break, but it also gives it that like pretty break point, so it breaks at the score and not just like in a random area. So this is the first time that this has happened, but now I know that I need to make the big score a little deeper. But stuff like this is why making bread is so fun, because you are gonna learn as you go. It's not like you start off making one perfect loaf, although like my first loaf, it was, I think, my like prettiest, I'm not gonna lie. But that's not always the case, and clearly even if that is the case, you can still, as time goes on, make mistakes that you learn from, and it's just so fun to like do trial and error and learn different things. I've also been learning about like underproofing and overproofing, and just like as I've been doing the process, I've been learning more and more about it. But here's the thing, even if something with your bread doesn't go perfect, like last time I definitely overproofed my bread a little bit, which means that the bulk fermentation process went on a little too long, and that resulted in more bubbles of the bread. It kind of rose unevenly. But guess what, you guys, that loaf tasted amazing. No matter what you do, as long as you don't completely burn it, or as long as it's not like undercooked, these loaves that you make at home are gonna taste so much better than store-bought bread. They're gonna be so much fresher. Like every loaf you make, it's gonna be fun, it's gonna be edible, it's gonna be great. But through the process of doing it over and over again and learning more, it's just gonna continue to get better and better. But like it's really, you can't mess it up too hard. You're always gonna have edible bread, again, as long as you don't forget about it for like 3 hours and completely burn it. But so what I've been doing is I've actually been baking a loaf, not every single week, but every other week. So what I do is I'm gonna let this cool completely, and then I'm gonna cut it in half, and I'm actually gonna freeze one of the halves. Then Miles and I will eat the other half throughout the week. We'll keep one half fresh and eat that this week. Then when we're done with the fresh half, I will thaw the frozen half. And how you do that is you just you can Google this, it's super, super easy. What you do is you just take the frozen loaf, soak the outside with water just from the sink, and then throw it in the oven. I think it's like 375 for like 10 or 15 minutes, and it'll completely thaw and it'll come back to life. just like it's fresh bread. So this loaf will last Miles and I 2 weeks. And on the opposite weeks, I've been using my sourdough starter to make like other creations. So 1 week on the opposite week, I made homemade sourdough English muffins. These are so easy and I keep them frozen so we can eat them just whenever we want. But what I do when I want to eat it is I pop it in the microwave for like 2 minutes and then I open it and toast it, and we've got fresh homemade sourdough English muffins. So I did that once on the opposite week. And then on a different opposite week, I made homemade cardamom buns. And you guys, these are the most incredible things I've ever made. And these, again, I just keep frozen so we can eat them whenever we want. I made, I think, like 20 cardamom buns when I made these. So like obviously if I kept them fresh, most of them would have gone to waste. So I just baked them, and before I glazed them, I froze them. And now when we want to eat them, I just put them in the oven for a few minutes. Then when they come out, I glaze them. And you guys, they're completely amazing, fresh, wonderful, homemade cardamom buns. Oh, made with the sourdough, by the way. I love baking things that can be frozen. I also do that with like cookie dough. Like I'll make normal cookie dough batter that makes like 15 cookies. I portion them out into individual cookies just like you would before you would bake them. But instead of baking the raw cookie dough, I actually freeze it. That way, whenever Miles and I want 1 or 2 cookies, I can just pull out the frozen dough, put it on a cookie sheet and bake it. And I love doing that because it allows like the fruits of your labor of baking to like extend longer. I only live with Miles. It's just him and I. We don't need a full sheet of cookies. So a lot of times it's like, well, if we're not gonna eat a full sheet of cookies, should we even bake? But when you realize that you can freeze things, that means that you can bake as much as you want. And you can have this stockpile of amazing homemade frozen goodies in your freezer that you can bake and bring back to life as you want them. To me, that just makes baking make so much more sense. It allows me to bake more often, it allows me to try new things, and it also allows me to like romanticize my everyday life. Because like on a random Tuesday, it takes me 10 minutes to heat up a wonderful homemade cardamom bun, and that is just so spectacular to me. That is so low effort, and that makes a random Tuesday so special, so fun. So yeah, you can clearly tell I love baking. It's one of my favorite hobbies. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope you also enjoyed part 1. I know it was kind of like long, but I figured I would rather just like talk it through, you know? Also, a lot of my friends and family have been asking me for my routine and for tips and tricks, and selfishly, instead of writing out a full paragraph every time and asking or answering all the little questions, selfishly, if I could be able to just send them part 1 and part 2 and say, watch this and then let me know if you have any questions, selfishly, that also makes my life a little easier. So I really hope you guys enjoyed this. Let me know if you have any other questions. As I continue my baking journey, this is also going to be fun for me to look back on and be like, oh my God, when I was 2 months into my sourdough journey, I thought this or I thought that, and now I know so much more. So this is really cool for me too, to just like document this era. But if you made it to this part in the video, don't forget to like and subscribe. And as always, me and Judith hope that you're having a good day. We hope you're having a good week, and we'll see you guys next time.